How's everyone doing today? You can't hear me? Testing? Can you hear me now?
It's on.
Okay, can we turn it up maybe?
Here. He was just using it, so.
Okay, let me try this now. Oh, I can hear that much better, I think. It's hard to tell.
Well, it's intentionally back beyond the microphone.
Yeah. That's okay. Okay, hello, can you all hear me okay now? Okay. Iffy? Okay. Huh. How do I turn this up a bit?
There's a gain on there, but.
Okay. You said it's all the way up over there? I mean, I guess I could just talk really loud. Does that work? Wow, I can even hear that. Okay. Testing. Okay, I can definitely hear that. Okay, this means the hoodie is zipping up. Let's see. Does that help at all? Try this. Can you guys hear me better now? Okay. Sound test from hell, I gotta say. Okay, cool. How's everyone doing today? Woo! Cool. Who's been to PhreakNIC before? And who's here for the first time? Wow. Okay, cool. Got a pretty diverse crowd. It's great to see everyone here. It's kind of interesting that I get to kind of pivot off of the last talk, which was going into social networking a little bit. My talk, I'm going to be discussing identity and kind of the paradigms that I've discovered and, among other things, some Google Plus things that happened to me. But first I want to comment on the photo. Does anybody recognize the picture on this opening slide here? Yes. So American Gothic has some crazy history to it. What's that? And Guy Fawkes, yes, anonymous, among other things. So just a brief commentary on this before I get started. This was painted by a guy named, I think, Grant Wood in 1930. And it's fascinating because you see this, and it's kind of this iconic photo of almost in a Puritan American farmer life. And it's actually, none of those people, those two people in there, they all posed separately for Grant Wood. Away, none of them ever actually stood in front of the building, and it was all kind of pieced together to create this sort of image for it. And he entered it into some contest that was local to him in 1930, and it got like third place. Nobody really cared about it. And it wasn't until it started to appear in a couple of things where people were getting pissed off because it was representing an image of something, something like the shaken hand of Puritanism that they really didn't like, and they didn't want this image to be representing them. And as they started to complain about it, it got more and more into the media, and it became parodied over and over again, and that's actually how it became famous. The image itself, the painting itself, didn't actually represent anything until people started like looking at it and identifying with it in ways that they didn't really care for. And that's one of the things I'm going to be discussing a bit. But first, I want to just start out with a poem, I suppose. Try to add a little touch of poetry to PhreakNIC and whatnot. Anybody who's a fan of Emily Dickinson? I'm Aestetix. Who are you? Are you Aestetix too? Then there's a pair of us, but don't tell Google, did suspend my account, you know, if anybody's familiar with the famous Emily Dickinson poem. So, just a quick biography. I'm really happy to be here this year. This is my 11th PhreakNIC in a row. My first conference was PhreakNIC 5 in 2001, a month after 9/11 happened. So I've been a speaker here and other places. I'm also part of the HOPE conference. If anyone's familiar with 2600 magazine, I'm involved. Oh, cool, got a yippee. I'm involved in the Hackers on Planet Earth conference. The next one's going to be the 13th and 15th of July 2012. So mark your calendars now. Also involved in OpenAMD, the Attending Metadata project, which is an RFID tracking system. If you saw the badges that we did at the last HOPE and the next HOPE in 2008 and 2012, we've also deployed in Brussels, Belgium, and CCC in Germany and a few other places. And it's a lot of fun. And that has actually helped me to refine some of my interests here as I explore the notions of identity, privacy, and our concerns within, especially as we look and explore what exactly social networks are. I have also been involved in NoiseBridge, the hackerspace in San Francisco, where I live. And some of the elements from NoiseBridge that we have learned, because NoiseBridge is a hackerspace that is pure anarchy, there are no rules. There's, with one exception, that the one rule of NoiseBridge is to be excellent to each other. And I guess the second rule is that there are no rules. So seeing the lessons that we have learned as the social space of NoiseBridge has developed over time, as well as just some of the research and some of the studies that I have done prompted by various events and whatnot, has led to some really interesting conclusions, and I'd like to explore some of them. So I'm also not on Google Plus anymore. Want to know why? It's pretty fucked up. So I want to start out with a quick story. Back in like July of this year, Google Plus came out. And I was really, really excited about this. So Facebook, I fucking hate Facebook, but I also use it because you kind of have to use Facebook if you want to maintain any kind of presence. Like, for example, there are friends I have who host events. Like, maybe they'll throw a house party or something else. The only way you know about it is because you get an event invite through Facebook. So there are certain reasons, social obligations, for which I had to jump onto it. And there's a bunch of things about it I don't like. I'll cover some of them. But Google, it seemed like this amazing godsend. Google Plus came out. I was an early user and got an invite through a friend who worked at Google. And I thought it was absolutely amazing. So I was super happy to see it. I went to like a family reunion. I was hyping to everyone about how great it was. The Google Circles, they answered a bunch of things that I was concerned about. And what was really, really, really meaningful to me is that Google was actually listening to people who were giving it feedback. So for example, with Facebook, people complain about it all the time, and you kind of hit brick walls. Nobody really gives a shit. But Google, so for example, one of the discussions on privacy issues a friend of mine discovered early on was that, first off, has anybody here used Google Plus or Facebook at all? Okay, some hands. So when you make a post in Google Plus, it's kind of like you create a status update. They don't have any character limitations. That's one of the things I really like. And then people can comment on it. And this is just a quick example of how they address privacy issues. If you make a post and you say have certain privacy settings, so let's say it's for coworkers. You have something you want all your coworkers to see, and then somebody makes a comment on it, and they mention somebody else's name who's also a Google Plus member in one of those comments, then the person who's mentioned in the comment gets access to that post. So that becomes a really, really big issue when, for example, somebody is discussing maybe their queerness or their homosexuality or something, and somebody leaves a comment mentioning their brother or like one of their family members, and suddenly their entire family knows that they're out. And that's one of the more mild examples of that. There are other things like, for example, if you are an insurgent in Syria and you're trying to converse with other friends of yours, and then somebody mentions the name of a government official, and then suddenly the government knows who you are and they're mapping all this stuff. So there's some pretty intense things. So there were some debates going on back and forth, and Google listened, and they actually adjusted the privacy policy within Google Plus to reflect that. So I was really, really, really happy about that. Another thing they did with gender privacy controls, they actually changed the settings so that you could control not only what your gender was, that if you choose to display one, but also to whom it gets displayed. I also was biased because I thought it had better interface and more usability than Facebook. There were a lot of things that it did differently that I really liked, and it's pretty. I mean, I like pretty pictures. What about you guys? Yeah, and I thought this was awesome, and then one day, what the fuck? Like, I'm using it, and I get fucking suspended, and I'm like, dude, this is not cool. What the hell? And I don't know if you can read this, but it says, your profile is suspended. After reviewing your profile, we determined that the name you provided violates our community standards. By the way, at the time, this was a dead link. Like, you clicked on the community standards and you get a 404. It says, yeah, don't get me started on that. It says, if you believe that your profile has been suspended in error, please, and they give you a link to a form where you can file an appeal, and I did. And I'll get to more of the details later on. But one of the things, I wanted to provide this as kind of an introductory context because this got me to start exploring, like, it's saying, the name you provided violates our community standards, and this is how I became introduced to their real names policy, which led to the NIM wars. And I'm like, okay. So we have an issue with names and knowing who you are and identity. I'm like, well, what does identity really mean? And it turned out that I really didn't know. So what's the first thing that you do when you don't know something? You go to Google. So I Googled it. I was like, what is identity? And the first couple of responses here, you see, the fact of being who or what a person or thing is. Okay. Number 2, the characteristics determining this. Like, okay. Number 3, serving to establish who the holder, owner, or wearer is by bearing their name and often other details such as a signature or photograph. So these things, and the rest of them are more mathematical, like some like computer functions and whatnot. But these all have one thing in common. They're very inconclusive, and they make no sense to me, and they really show that Google doesn't have an answer. So I'm like, okay. Google doesn't have an answer, so let me go and consult some smarter people than me. So I went onto a quote site, and I was like trying to look at famous people in history, what have they said about identity? So the first one I looked at was Oscar Wilde. Interesting quote here. Most people are other people. Their thoughts are someone else's opinions, their lives a mimicry. Okay, their passion's a quotation. Beautiful quote. Not really good answer, though. So Chuck Palahniuk, Fight Club guy. Nothing of me is original. I am the combined effort of everyone I've ever known. I'm like, oh, okay, I can buy that. It's not really a description. Okay, Shakespeare. We know what we are, but not what we may be. Okay, that's poetic. Gandhi. The best way to find yourself is to lose yourself in the service of others. So, once again, I consulted Google. I consulted all these super smart, famous people. They don't seem to fucking clue what identity is either. Okay, so I'm going to erase all of that and go back to the very, very basics of it and trying to figure out what identity is. So I have two notions here. First, identity is not the same thing as a name. This is actually a really, really important distinction. A name is, I define it here as a label that is used to identify a person, thing, or concept within a given context. And I struggled a long time trying to come up with a good definition of name. Maybe somebody here has a better one than that. But to me, that begins to sort of encompass what it is that I'm trying to get at. So the two photos up here, you have Adam naming the animals, because if you don't name something, then you can't identify it later. And then you have royal seals, the notion that you have a royal person who stamps a seal onto something, and then you know it came from them, which also creates a security measure. You know that it's not spoofed, among other things. So these concepts, what I'm getting at is these concepts have been around for a while. I decided to start exploring the notion of what social networks were, taking away everything, including computers. I don't get into computers for a little bit here. I want to look at what this stuff actually is. So, went into context. One of them is within a set or a group. So, classmates. This entire audience right here constitutes, you're all in this talk right now. You might not be in this room an hour from now, but this is a way that I can identify you within a crowd. Your particular location, Nashville. I live in Oakland. I've given talks in Berlin. Other people have other ways to identify things. Specific time. One of the interesting things about the time here is that morning, that can be like a range of time. Like morning could be between 6 a.m. and noon. 9 p.m. is a more granular time. I didn't mention a time zone, though. Last week, is it like 3 days last week, or is it the entirety of last week, or it could be joined by an interest. So Joe likes baseball is different from the Joe who likes hockey. So, or maybe there's a Joe who likes both. And these are very weak, but it's the power of words that allow us to kind of differentiate between people and use that to identify who somebody is. And you can use words to either join groups together or differentiate them. And it becomes very powerful. Which gets into the next question I had. Is identity internal or external? So this gets into the Freudian notion of id ego, and superego and whatnot. And then the notions of reputation. Has anyone here seen Citizen Kane? Okay. Citizen Kane is a very interesting movie in that the main character is not in it. The movie starts out with Charles Foster Kane, aka William Randolph Hearst, dying at the very beginning of the movie, and then the rest of it is talking to people who he knew and trying to piece together a persona of who he was based on the hearsay of others, thereby constructing an identity of him without actually talking with him. Which is really, really interesting because it makes me think, well, is identity what you think of yourself, or is identity what others think of you? Is identity your own image of what others think of you? This is getting down a rabbit hole really fast. And one of my favorite quotes by Oscar Wilde here, the only thing worse than being talked about is not being talked about. How many people here give a shit what other people think about them? So, basically, I don't have a fucking clue what identity is. I can explore it, and I think a lot of other people have explored it, and I think perhaps there are 1,000-page treatises on trying to figure this out, but it's a really, really, really difficult problem. Names are a little bit easier because they're kind of a label that you can use to differentiate or to conjoin, but this stuff is tricky. This stuff is really hard, which means that in the end, I do have a lot of sympathy for the people at Facebook and Google who are trying to set policies. I have sympathy for like the guy who gave the previous talk who's trying to figure out ways that you can identify people. This stuff is really hard. So here's a question. Is Eric Cartman a person? Okay. Well, who says yes? Who says no? Who has no clue? It's interesting because what is it that you consider a person? I mean, there's the whole Citizens United corporations are people. But, I mean, Eric Cartman. Like, to me, it's a persona. You say Eric Cartman this or that, and people generally know what you're talking about. But if you break it down, it's an animation, it's cardboard, his voice is from somebody else. All these different pieces brought together, but it creates an identity. And there's no such thing as Eric Cartman. I mean, there might be little Eric Cartman dolls, which ascribe a similar identity to that, but it's really, really tricky. So 2 examples that I wanted to share with you about how identity plays roles in society. Was anybody here for my earlier talk that I gave like 2 hours ago? So I've been involved in the Occupy Wall Street movement in Oakland, California, and I've started becoming a legal observer, which means I work with the National Lawyers Guild, and I wear this really ugly green hat. I didn't bring it with me to show it off, how ugly it is. It's really fucking hideous. It's like you can spot a legal observer right away. But you go to a training for like an hour and a half, and you learn the ins and outs of what you should do, what you shouldn't do, and it's really useful. But the thing is, I was going to the protest before, and people were treating me like a regular protester. Then I went to the training. I take this hat, I put the hat on, and they treated me completely differently. People would look at me with reverence. They're like, wow, I had people come up to me and tell me, thank you for serving your country. I'm like, okay, so there are people who do 3, 4, 5-year tours in Iraq who are, handling democracy for the rest of us and whatnot. That's serving our country. I went to an hour-and-a-half training session. I put on a fucking hat, and you say I'm serving my country. But that's my view of it, and they see the hat, and they see this. It has a certain sense of power to it. And it's interesting because it gives you the sense of authority. It's the same way that put in on a badge does. I mean, these are all labels. These are all symbols that you can put upon yourself, and people will look at you slightly differently, and they will treat you differently. So another interesting example of that is the Stanford Prisoner Experiment. Stanford Prisoner Experiment. Anybody here familiar with it? Oh, sweet. Okay. So I think this was 1972 when Philip Zimbardo did this. He's a professor at Stanford, and they rounded up a bunch of, it was either undergrad or grad students. There's a fantastic book about this called The Lucifer Effect. But they rounded up a bunch of people, and they effectively ascribed them labels, either prison guards or jailmates. What's that? Crazy, yeah. Regular person, and then somebody gives you this label that said, you're going to be a guard in the jail, or you're going to be a prisoner in the jail. And they actually found that as people went on along with the experiment, that they personified the given characteristics of what they thought it was supposed to be. So the people who were jail wardens began to act as jail wardens. Maybe it was based on what they saw on television. Maybe it was, other imprimers that had led them to these ideas. But giving them that label completely changed how they thought and acted within that context and environment. And it was actually so successful that they had to end the experiment after 4 days because it just got too brutal. So it's kind of creepy, isn't it? So let me move on to my conclusions about this. And my main conclusion is that identity is so complex that neither Gandhi or Shakespeare can figure it out. So I'm probably not going to. My other conclusion here is that identity by its very nature is multifaceted. Since identity is context dependent, no person has one single identity. And that's kind of the thesis of all of this, because a lot of what we're seeing right now with the internet and with technology is we're trying to take things which are in a social system or a social network, basically how people work, act, and operate, and we're trying to transcribe that into a digital form. And I think that it's really badly done. I mean, there are ways it can be improved. It could be a lot worse. But there's a lot of ways that we can improve on it. And that's some of what I'm going to be discussing here. I think that claiming that people have a single identity, I personally believe that this is a misnomer. I believe that's a very fundamental misunderstanding of how human beings exist. So before we go there, though, I want to get into the notion of different types of names, since we've been exploring that already. So there's a fuck ton of things on here. So birth certificate or given name, legal name or wallet name. My friend Scud came up with the term wallet name after all the Google Plus started to come down. She runs Infotrope, and she was one of the people that was very active in all the NIM wars. Government-issued ID, so you have driver's license, a passport, and a social security number, which is actually interesting because driver's license is state and passport is federal. Student ID, employee ID, credit card, and all this other stuff. So what's really fascinating to me is we have about half a dozen different forms of ID right here, right? Each of them can be equally valid and equally different from each other else at the same time. So there's no such thing to me as a legal name. What if you have, say, a middle name or only one name? We'll get to that in a second. But what if you have a driver's license and a passport, and then you get your name changed, or you get married and you haven't updated your passport? Those both government documents are valid. They both legally describe who you are, and they're both different. So some of the other interesting stuff, by the way, with account information I'm referring to, let's say I call Comcast and I want to clarify something about my bill. And what do they ask you for usually? They ask you maybe your social, maybe your address, maybe things like your mother's maiden name, which our friend Virgil a couple of years ago wrote a paper about that and how easy it is to actually predict what somebody's mother's maiden name is. And the question is it actually possible to uniquely identify somebody given a name? And I think it's going to be a lot more complicated than that. So there are other types of names, so I want to kind of enumerate. These are informal names. These are not usually found in any document except if you have a PhreakNIC pass or something. So you have pseudonyms, names that is not found on any of this stuff, which may or may not be linkable to you depending on how much you use social networks. A polynym could be that's a name consistent of multiple words. So that could be something like Charles Foster Kane, as opposed to a mononym, which is just Charles. And I do have a couple of friends who their legal name is just one word. And that has caused a number of problems with systems. It really has. Like, by the way, has anybody seen the Programmer's Guide to Names? There's a website that has this. It's a blog entry that has this list of about 40 different things. It starts out a programmer trying to write a system for validating what somebody's name is. And it's like, okay, here's an exception. Here's another exception. Here's another exception. So, everyone has letters, and everyone's name has letters. Everyone has multiple words in their name. Everyone has Roman characters in their name. And it turns out that identifying somebody's name is really, really tricky. The other one here, anonym, a name representing an anonymity. So anonymous coward, things like that. So this is going to become important. I also want to make sure that we understand the distinction here between a pseudonym and an anonym. A pseudonym is something like, for example, Aestetix could be considered a pseudonym. Whereas anonymity, if I were coming in and saying, I'm anonymous, very, very different things. And as we get into the arguments, we'll go into some of the things that people have said about this. And it shows a fundamental misunderstanding of how some of these things work. So, by the way, does anybody recognize that guy? Yes. Of course you do. Yes, Hail Eris. So, some famous pseudonyms in history. People know the name Publius. It's one of my favorites. Publius was the name that all the Federalist Papers were published under, which was, what was it, Alexander Hamilton, John Jay, and, what? Yeah, okay. So, Publius, these were papers that came out right after the ratification of the United States Constitution, as they began to really, really discuss what was going on. In terms of, we have all these laws, what do they really mean? And people starting to explore the ramifications of different things. There were any number of reasons they were published under a pseudonym, but I think it actually helped to empower it, because if you see something and you don't know the name that's ascribed to it, then it removes some of the bias that you have when you're looking at the context for it. Another one here is Emperor Norton, first emperor of the United States and protector of Mexico. Has anybody heard Sandman? Okay, okay. Basically, Emperor Norton moved to San Francisco in the mid-1800s, and he lost a bunch of money on some bad deals, and he one day sent a letter to the editor of the Chronicle, the San Francisco Chronicle, I think, declaring himself the Emperor of the United States and protector of Mexico. And because it was San Francisco, everyone went along with it. It was fucking awesome.
He printed his own money.
Yes.
And it's very valuable.
Yeah, he printed his own money. People greeted him as His Majesty. But he gave himself a title, and people respected it, and they adhered to it. Maybe it's because he was a badass, but I mean, he was kind of a crazy nut. But he's also kind of an icon in San Francisco history, and I think kind of applicable to this. Nicolas Bourbaki is another interesting example. Anyone familiar? Nicolas Bourbaki was a group of French mathematicians in the 1930s who decided to recreate mathematics from the ground up, and they published everything under a single name of Bourbaki. And there were a number of reasons for doing this. It was a secret society. And this is really fascinating, seeing how things change and how people's impressions change, both those who are writing the documents and those who are reading them, as you're using a name different from the name that you thought it might come from. So other names, Voltaire, who was using a fake name among other reasons because he published Candide, and I think that the King of France at the time wanted to kill whoever wrote the book, and he could deny the authorship. Mark Twain, Dr. Seuss, many other people. Has anyone here ever used a pseudonym? Really? There's 4 people total. Right, okay. Anybody here ever used IRC? Right, anybody who's ever used a hacker handle? I mean, seriously. Okay, one more, yep. So this gets into some more in-depth and interesting stuff I alluded to earlier. So the question is, why do names matter? Because a name is generally attached to an idea or a piece of context or an action. So in this case, I assume everyone here, is there anybody in this room not familiar with WikiLeaks? Okay, good. So a friend of mine, Jonathan Stray, did some work into, I think it was both the Afghan and the Iraq war logs, where they were trying to figure out, they were trying to contextualize what was going on then, because there's a fuck ton of documents. I think it was like 50,000 and then 500,000, something like that. And one of the things that they found, so Julian Assange has made the claim that the source does not matter, it's the content that does matter. And one of the questions here is, can you infer information about the document based on the source? How do you validate the document? How do you know it's not fake? Things like that. That's one of the problems that we've been looking at if you take the source away. One of the things that they found in looking through the documents is that you can actually validate and build upon how good, I suppose, one of these documents is by looking at a couple of keywords and matching it to other documents and seeing if those other documents have the keywords. So for example, if I am on the ground somewhere in a certain place and there's an explosion and there's a car, maybe there are 3 cars and there's a soldier there, you can corroborate that with other documents to see if this same story is held. This is just like collecting testimony from different people and bringing it together. You can actually bring up an assessment, and they wrote a number of algorithms that went through and began to group up all the different documents into not just where it was, but what was going on, and create an effective timeline and begin to piece together out of the chaos a bit of structure as to what was going on. So it was really a fascinating project. He gave a really good talk about it. I highly recommend checking out. Here's another interesting one. Did anyone see this? Okay, one person. So Penn Jillette, just for context here, has 1.7 million Twitter followers. And he, on May 2nd of this year, posted this beautiful quote from Martin Luther King. I mourn at the loss of thousands of precious lives, but I will never rejoice in the death of one, not even an enemy. I think that's pretty cool. I mean, I'm in favor of treating other people well and things like that. Well, there's only one problem with this. It wasn't MLK. Okay, you guys probably saw the news. So this is interesting because he then posted a follow-up. Oh, I checked a long quote from MLK's Strength to Love that spoke to some of my feelings and cut and pasted an altered hunk. Sorry. So he posted another tweet, kind of redacting what he had said before. So one other interesting thing, and this is where we start to get into social media breaking down. Take a look at this really quickly. You see at the bottom there it says retweeted by what's his name and 50 others. This is the correction. Well, take a look at the first slide. Retweeted by this guy and 100 plus others. Even though he posted a correction, the means of distribution, that being the Twitter network, only caught the first one. It caught the second one a little bit, but even though he was able to post a correction, that correction didn't get to people. And that strikes into the very core of some of the stuff that we'll be getting into in a moment. So the question here is, why did that get propagated? Because I think it was because it was MLK. I mean, every individual who retweeted it had a different reason for doing so. But it's just really interesting that people are more likely to retweet something maybe because they see Martin Luther King. Maybe they didn't even read the quote. But when they see a correction, they're far less likely to retweet it. Maybe they didn't see it. Maybe they were paying attention to Twitter for 1 minute, and then the next minute they got called off to something else. There's no way to tell, but this is one of the breakdowns of social media. Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, it gets propagated by other means as well. Excellent point. And the question is, well, how do we track that? And we're still trying to figure that out. So here are a couple of other examples. Let's see. Porn WikiLeaks. Did anyone hear about this? This one pissed me the fuck off. Like, this was actually really fucked up. And this is one of the reasons that spreading an idea, like the WikiLeaks notion of, let's take a document and spread it all over the place, actually fails at certain points. So Porn WikiLeaks involves anybody familiar with the adult industry medical database? Anybody who is in porn or does any kind of sex work has to submit test results regularly, especially HIV test results, through this common database so that they can make sure that if they participate in any kind of sex scene for the adult film industry, that they are safe. Even though they already use safety and whatnot, having updated records is required by law in many places. So some asshole decided that some asshole somehow got a hold of the AIM registry, and he created the website Porn WikiLeaks, where he created a database where you could look up the name of somebody, their stage name, and it would bring up all the information of them that was in that database. So this is problematic for people who are in porn, but maybe they have two lives. Maybe they have another life where they have all their friends and family who had no idea about it, or maybe their friends and family do know about it and they're very supportive, but some fuckhead finds them on this website and then goes and throws eggs at their parents' place. I mean, the sex in our culture is a very, very challenging topic, and to do something like that, for example, I had 3 friends that were in there. I went and checked all of them, and I stopped doing it after that because I didn't want to freak out too much. But this scares the shit out of me, the fact that this happens. That's why names matter, because you have the pseudonym that somebody's using a stage name, and then you have their real name, their quote-unquote their wallet name, and if you group them together like that, then it merges 2 worlds which may not have needed to merge. Another one, did you guys hear about the lesbian Syrian blogger? So Google for the specifics on this, but this is really fascinating. There was, I think her name was Irina. There was a blogger who was purportedly a lesbian in Syria who was making a number of updates about what was going on in Syrian politics and how women were being treated there and whatnot, and actually becoming a definitive source to the point that places like CNN and Reuters were looking to her as a source for all this different stuff. Well, the problem was, not only did this person not live in Syria, but this person wasn't a woman. It was a 51-year-old American living in Scotland. Right, and there was another case of this where it turned out to be another American, I think, living in France or something like that. But the fact that they created this artificial persona that people looked to and they saw what they considered to be a persona and validated information, it turned out to be something completely different. So does this invalidate everything they said because they were not who they said they were? Does the information that they posted, if it is all completely valid on that blog, but they're not a Syrian, does that discredit them? What do you guys think? It's a tough one. What? Yeah, you really do. It's difficult. The SJ controversy, I saw Ilanka pipe up a little bit there. Yeah, so there was, I can't remember the guy's name. Was it John something? Do you know offhand? Okay. Right, so people who are familiar with Wikipedia, where you can in general go and create an account and make edits, hopefully to further the good of human knowledge. There was a character on there named SJ. This happened back in 2006, where he was making a number of statements and seemed fairly well informed to the point where people were interviewing him about it. And he was coming off, I think saying that he had a PhD in divinity and was a professor at some university, until it came out that he was actually a 24-year-old kid living in Louisville. Without a degree, yes. And that caused a ton of controversy because people are like, wait a minute, we've been listening to this guy and making arguments with him all along, and he's not what he says he is. And the Obama birth certificate I kind of tacked on there because a lot of people think that Obama, everything that he is doing is somehow invalid because they don't believe that he's a U.S. citizen. So all of these, I'm kind of glossing over them, but they're all pretty heated, and they're all incredibly complex. So the next element of this, now that we have looked at what identity is and what names are, I want to take a look at what social networks are. So I have a number of examples up here. So book groups, knitting circles, unions, events, courtrooms, a cause, things like that. Does anybody have anything they want to add to this, in terms of groups? A HackerCon, yes. Okay, so PhreakNIC is in fact a social network, and it's interesting because some of these are very time sensitive. It's like a hobby or preference. You're linked together to people who have a similar interest with you. Or you're at a courtroom, right? So what does it look like if you're in a courtroom? You probably have a different makeup of people that are there. So you have a judge, you have maybe a jury, you'll have the plaintiff, you'll have the defendant, and other people. And maybe the jury or maybe the trial lasts a week. So every day you go in there and you see all these people who, they have a normal, regular name that they go by, But then when they come into the courtroom, you address them as judge, or you address them as, your most honorable, or whatever else. And because of the place that they have, the identity that they claim within that context, you treat them differently. And there are certain skills that are required for that. But it's just a really interesting example of all this. Because within a social network, people often affirm different types of identities based on what it is that they're doing. Somebody could be the president of some organization, but at another one, they're just a peon that doesn't do anything except grunt work. And it's really all these different elements hone into the diversity of just how difficult the identity is to describe and just how complex we are as people. So in an attempt to try to define this after going through a few examples, I'd say maybe a social network is a force that brings people or their personas together on a regular basis. The regular basis part is kind of important because it's kind of a glue that holds us together. And what regular basis is incredibly context dependent based on whatever it is that you're doing. And a friend here is a person that you would choose to be in contact with. So that gets interesting because sometimes humans have this tendency to personify objects. So you might call your little pet frog a friend. You might call your cat or dog a friend. Dog is a man's best friend. Friend is actually really kind of nebulous. And does friendship have to be mutual? What do you guys think? Does friendship need to be mutual? What do you think? Yes. Okay. So that gets interesting because are there certain reasons that you're friends with different people? And could that friendship be severed? Or maybe you think that you're friends with somebody and the other person doesn't think that you're friends with them? So, what? Yes, and it's also very political, according to Washington these days. So one of the things that social networks do is they help to solve namespace collisions, which is the technical way of saying, okay, well, I have two Joes. One of the Joes is a Linux geek and the other Joe is a Mac guy. And it's kind of a weak label that you can put on them, but it helps at least for us to mentally differentiate between everyone. So, is anybody familiar with Ed Bernays? One of my favorite actors in all of this. So Ed Bernays is the father of the words public relations. Back in the 1910s, I guess, during World War I, the word propaganda became shattered by Germany. Like, people couldn't say it anymore because the stigma on the word was so deep. So Ed Bernays saw what was going on, and he started to look at how people work and how people operate and how social networks really function. And he created this term, public relations. And he's actually the father of public relations, opened up the first public relations office in New York City. One of the observations that he made is that in any social group, you have leaders and followers. So you have somebody at the very top, and then all these people below them. And of course, this is very, very subjective, and it depends entirely on people's viewpoints. But a quick example of this could be at a church. You have a priest, and then you have the congregation. And if the priest says something about a religious thing, people are going to tend to believe him. And what that really means is when you have this notion of identity conjoined with, say, a person who is a priest, and they say something, not only does that identity give them certain skills, but what they're saying is heard and believed by people by very notion of who they are and what they do. They are an influencer. So this gets really interesting when you look into a number of different social groups. Like, for example, Boing Boing is one of the ones I like to use, or Twitter, or anything like that. If something is on Boing Boing, how many people here read Boing Boing, by the way? A few hands. If something is on Boing Boing, it's likely to spread around for the people who read it. And this gets into the notion of broadcasting and whatnot, and it gets into the notion of what social networks are all about. So this picture on the right is from the 1929 Easter Parade in New York. So the tobacco place contacted Ed Bernays, and they're like, hey, there's this problem we're having. There's this big taboo on women smoking. And we're trying to figure out how to break that, because if we can get women to smoke, then it'll double our market. So what he figured out was that if you take two ideas and conjoin them together, it can break a former one. So in this picture, we have a woman who is fairly well-dressed, standing next to a guy who's also fairly well-dressed. And this is also around the time, I think, of women's suffrage and some other things. And they took a couple of key photos of women who looked incredibly well-to-do and successful, all holding cigarettes. And this photo appeared in a number of newspapers. And overnight, it shattered the taboo on women smoking because people saw this and they're like, oh my God, I'm a woman, and if I smoke a cigarette, then that will escalate my status, and I will hold status above everyone else. Yes, I see people rolling eyes, but that's just, it worked. It was creepy. Yes, exactly why, right. It's how advertisement works. Yes, a lot of it stems back to, he has a great book called Propaganda I highly recommend. I think it was from 1931. Look it up. But there's a couple of other studies that I want to get. I want to make a quick definition first. Intrapersonal versus interpersonal communication. This is kind of like Communications 101. Intrapersonal is your internal dialogue with yourself, such as our exploration of what identity is about. Interpersonal is your communication with other people. So as you create a social network, as you get one person and bring other people together, you have a social network of sorts, and different relations develop within them over time. So Dunbar's number is crazy. So Dr. Robin Dunbar is a sociologist who did a study released in 1992, studying the size of primates' brains, so like, I guess, Homo sapiens and monkeys and whatnot, and discovered that there was a correlation between the size of their brains and the type of social groups they went around with, like the quantity of people they would hang out with. And applied this mathematically to the Homo sapiens sapien, the human beings, and discovered that the average size of the social group that we can be with, by which I mean the people that you can kind of know on a regular basis, is about 148.5, which usually gets rounded up to 150. And which is really interesting because, like, for example, some of the work that I've done at Noisebridge, as the community grew over time, it became more and more difficult to know who everyone was and what they were all working on. So in the early days of Noisebridge, when there were, like, 20, 30 members, you pretty much knew what everyone was doing and what they were working on and where to go and things like that. And then over time, it developed to the point where as more people came to Noisebridge, they started working on more things. It became more difficult to track to where it would break down into little tiny subgroups. And I think that's where a lot of the construct of bureaucracy that we have today is trying to match that and trying to create a system which reifies all of that. So another interesting study Dr. Cameron Marlowe did on Facebook, alluding back to Dunbar's number, took a look at Facebook and the average number of friends people have, and found that it's actually fairly close. I think the average man has about 120 friends, and the average woman has something like maybe 130, a little bit more. Women tend to be more social for some reason. And also found that the average man, while having 120 friends, generally associates or posts messages back and forth with about 7 of them, whereas a woman is closer to 10. So if somebody has more followers, they did a bit more on this. So somebody who has 500 friends, for example, men tend to post like 17 different people and have regular interactions, whereas women with lots of friends tend to have closer to 26. So really interesting and going through and trying to figure all this out. So now we're kind of at a turning point where we have all of these social dynamics that we've been studying over the years and trying to figure out who we are and how we operate. And the question is, how do we bring this all online? So we have telegraph, telephone, and all of these. I consider all of these social networks because a network to me is a relation between individuals. When you send an email to somebody, it's a communication, and therefore it's a form of a social network. It's not a social network in the sense of Facebook or a Google or anything like that. But it really gets into some complicated stuff. So email, Usenet, BBS, and all of this, people interacted in different ways. So websites, for example, is a communication. I post something up on the web, and people can come and read it. It's asynchronous in that I post something, and people can't post back unless I set up a blog of sorts. We're getting better at that, making the web more synchronous. But posting something up there creates broadcast, which is a network. So some interesting examples of conflicts that we've run into with this early on. WhiteHouse.com is probably my favorite, but I'm going to cover Nissan.com first. Nissan.com is owned by a guy, his last name is Nissan, and he owns a computer company. He's been running this computer company for about 2 decades. He registered the domain name Nissan.com in 1994. Well, the car company didn't really like this very much, and they filed a relentless number of lawsuits against him trying to get it back. And if you go to Nissan.com, it's a really crap-looking website. It looks like it's from 1995. But there's full details on the court case, and he's got ads all over the place trying to click from the traffic. But the fact of the matter is, he registered it first. And this is one of the problems that we run into with the internet, because if you have yourname.com, somebody else who has your same name, they can't use that name. They have to get something else. WhiteHouse.com ran into this problem where Does anybody remember this during the 90s? I see a few. Yeah, I see a few hands. Yeah. Can you imagine the teachers in like the elementary school who want to show their kids the internet in 1997 said, "Okay, class, today we're going to go check out. Let's look at WhiteHouse.com and see what the president." Oh, Jesus Christ. Right. Yeah, I found kind of a grody old screenshot of WhiteHouse.com just so I can put porn on my talk. But yeah, there's been a case back and forth about WhiteHouse.com for some time. I think it's kind of trailed off in the last few years. But these are both also examples of free speech and how important it is. Like, cybersquatting is kind of the inverse of this. Cybersquatting is where I register a domain name TomCruise.com and then tell Tom Cruise, hey, give me $1 million and I'll give you the domain. So there are two sides to this story. There are people who want identity, they want to express themselves, and then there are others who try to hijack somebody else's identity and take advantage of that. This is one of the shortcomings that we have on the internet right now, in that domain names are very limited. We're going through a round of startups and .coms right now in the Bay Area, and we're seeing some really clever names come up, and it's because we have this very limited character set that we can work with. I think last I checked, we ran out of 4-character like .com TLDs. Yeah, we ran out of that. Maybe it's up to number 5 now, like 5-character names that we've run out. 7? Jesus. Okay. So if your name is 7 characters long, suddenly you can't use your name.com, and you have to figure out another way that you can use to express yourself. And we're getting better at it. You know, there's the .tv names and the .net and .org and all these kind of crazy things that people are coming out with, which I think shows the virtue of human spirit, being able to overcome when even accidental censorship is put in its place. But that's another story altogether. So here, just getting a little bit more technical for a second. Here's some examples of establishing identity if you don't have anything. If you are, say, on the server side. So HTTP headers, you can look at where somebody came from. You can look at access times. Like, so if somebody accesses something at 3 in the morning your time over and over again, then maybe they're not from your time zone. Maybe they're from somewhere else. You can actually, there's a number of things you can do with that. URL access is important. So for example, if you see somebody who accesses facebook.com/yourname/edit and they get it denied, and then they access it again and they get accepted, you can actually use those headers to infer, that's either that person or they have their credentials for their identity. Request sequence, you can actually look at the paths people go through as they wander through a website. And patterns, maybe somebody goes to their profile first, maybe somebody goes through the top news first, things like that. Frequency of access, if they go to the web page at certain times or in certain frequencies, if there's like a news update that they're trying to keep up with. Response headers, as I said before, with if something is access denied versus access granted. And then using HTTP versus HTTPS, because some of that requires a certain amount of technical knowledge. I think it's getting a bit better, but at least just knowing how SSL works. Did anybody see the study, by the way, that the EFF put out about IP addresses? What's that? Yeah, there was a very recent article about this, like maybe in the last month. Marcia Hoffman wrote it, and basically the case that they're making is an IP address is not enough to constitute somebody's identity. Because, for example, let's say I work at a large corporation. That large corporation has a single IP address that the outside world can see, and there may be 10,000 people working inside. So if one person inside out of those 10,000 people is one who accesses that, unless they get more information from the corporation, the IP address is not enough to establish an identity. That is the case that they made. I hope that other governments and court cases adhere to that. So some questions that we're looking at are, how can a website confirm that you are you? For example, if you were logged in from a certain IP address and you leave an edit history in Wikipedia, if you are logged in using a certain username at a certain time, all of these things kind of pull together to verify who you are. This is the best that we have right now. It sucks. It doesn't really work very well, but it's so much better than not having anything. Other things you can try to use are, session variables and cookies and things like that. So this comes into a new question that we've been really seeing blow up in the last 10 years, which is as you establish online identity, then you have questions about privacy and transparency and things like that. And I don't know the answer to any of these questions, but I can ask them, and I can try to discuss this with people. So the last two are really interesting, but first I have a quick question. Random person, who here is on Facebook? Okay, guy right over there. Do you have your job listed on Facebook? Okay, do you have your salary posted with it? Okay, so as we can see, getting a closer notion of what identity is, you're beginning to have certain misgivings, and a lot of this is cultural, but why is it that you don't put your salary up there? That's completely reasonable. But would salary be considered full transparency? What is full transparency? I don't fucking know. This is why I'm asking these questions. There's a number of other things that come up with this. Like, for example, people are saying that the government needs to be more transparent because they are. I'm like, oh, you're transparent? Okay. When was the last time you had sex? I don't actually care. I don't want to know that, but that comes into the next question. What is active versus passive communication of personal information? So, for example, using those broadcast medium, let's say I put something up on a website. I don't tell anybody about it, but I still put it out there. Or as the US government does, they have a FOIA request where you can actively ask them for something. The government is passive. They're not going to actually do anything because they're kind of lazy. But, you know, whatever. That information is there. You just have to look for it. Whereas active would be government saying, here's something. We need to issue a press release. We need to send it over all of our social networking channels. So I'm saving the best question for last here. Who decides how transparent we get to be? Who here wants to decide for themselves? Okay, I see a few hands. Who here wants the government to decide for them? Any government. Who here wants Facebook to decide for you? This is one of the questions that we're really starting to get into. So I just want to get technical for another moment here. Some ways that you can promote privacy if you're a paranoid schizo fuck like I am. One of them is using Tor. Does anybody here not know about Tor? It's the onion router, basically. Okay. Tor basically allows people to surf the web anonymously. There's a number of technical things to it, but Tor is very useful for people who are in, say, Syria or Iran, and they're trying to get information out about what's actually going on because those governments are being incredibly repressive, and Tor is one way that they can do it. Selective login is really, really useful because if you think about it, if you run a web server and you don't log anything, then if somebody comes and hits you with a subpoena, you have nothing to give them, but you're fully in compliance with their subpoena. Well, I'm involved in the NoiseBridge Tor project, a project where you donate money to NoiseBridge, earmarked funds, and we spin up Tor exit nodes for you. The exit nodes are not logged at all. We have, if we were to run into something where law enforcement asks for them, we can't give it to them. And that way, you can work with the system. You can help encourage freedom of speech without screwing with the government. And at that point, they're like, whatever, okay. Usually, they just move on. Another interesting thing here, and this is where Facebook pisses me off. Privacy and sharing settings on websites. Like, how many people here have had their default privacy settings on Facebook changed without their consent? Yes, this is one of the reasons I really fucking hate Facebook. Google, as far as I'm aware, hasn't done this yet, but Facebook does this all the time. We'll get into some of that stuff in a minute, but that's really important, and it's really difficult when it's really complicated. Most people don't have like 5 hours to sit there and research all the different types and all the different ramifications. I believe the burden is on the website or the owner of it to make it easier for people to use, but that's just me. Remailers are also really useful, so like Mixmaster and things like that. Remailers, for people who aren't aware, you can send an email to a remailer and we'll strip it of all the headers, so it will forward the email onto the person you intend it to go to without any of the source material. It's a great way to get information to somebody, but not have it be tracked to you. Just a quick plug here of sorts, or an RIP. If anybody knows about Mixmaster, my friend Len Sassaman died earlier this year, and he was like one of the prime maintainers of it. So I just want to make sure to mention him because Meredith will really appreciate it. So, and this is where we start to get into the really deep things. There's some big problems, not just with the technology, because the technology that all places are setting up, they're trying to do the right thing. They're trying to make things easier. So I know Wikipedia's had problems with sock puppets. Facebook does too. The notion of anonymous cowards, cyber stalking. So, for example, if I'm trying to, let's say that I was in a relationship and she dumped me, and now I want to learn as much as I can about her so I can be a dick and harass her nonstop, as the guy who gave the previous talk has probably experienced. There's a lot of bad stuff out there. Another one, anonymous in these fucking DDoS attacks. They're really annoying. For example, 2600 servers have been getting hit by them. I don't know why. I guess it's just a bunch of angsty teens who have nothing better to do. I mean, it's really annoying. However, these are all problems that we run into when dealing with identity. These are reasons why I do believe identity is important. It's just trying to figure out and working together with other people to figure out what their notion of identity is to try to fasten it and make it a little bit better. So this will get into some other questions later about whether somebody who's operating under the guise of anonymity or pseudonym is inherently evil, I think that assertion is bad and actually almost malicious, not intentionally though. So let's take a look at what people who are at the top of these organizations are saying. We have what's that? Yeah, oh God. Eric Schmidt, executive chairman at Google, former CEO. So the only way to manage this is true transparency and no anonymity. In a world of asynchronous threats, it is too dangerous for there not to be some way to identify you. We need a verified name service for people. Governments will demand it. He gave this in, that was from a speech in August of 2010, which if people are interested, NIST, the government organization, has been working on NSTIC, I think, which is kind of an online identity thing, beyond the scope of this talk, though. Another quote from him: if you have something that you don't want anyone to know, maybe you shouldn't be doing it in the first place. To that I say, fuck you and your Puritan bullshit. What is this word shouldn't? Does anybody here do stuff they shouldn't? Who determines what you should and shouldn't do? I think you should determine it. Yeah, your mom, sure. Whatever happened to fucking consent and like making decisions on your own and not listening to what Eric Schmidt says you should do? That hits a core of me. So let's take a look at some other quotes here. Mark Zuckerberg, CEO of Facebook, October 2011. The days of you having a different image for your work friends or coworkers and for the other people you know are probably coming to an end pretty quickly. Having two identities for yourself is an example of a lack of integrity. Emphasis on the last three words. Yeah, fuck him. Fuck that. Having two identities is a lack of integrity? Does anybody here have more than one identity online? Right. So the question is, who is he to say this? Randy Zuckerberg, former Facebook marketing director, also Mark Zuckerberg's sister. I think anonymity on the internet has to go away. People behave a lot better when they have their real names down. I think people hide behind anonymity and they feel like they can say whatever they want behind closed doors. Who agrees with this statement? I disagree with that, actually.
Do I live in Syria or Iran, or do I live here?
That's a good question. Question, statement? Okay, what's up? Question back there? When people can what? I just want to repeat that for the mic. So you're saying if people are given the freedom to express themselves however they choose, they will be better than if they're doing something that they were told to do? Okay. So just a quick side note on this, by the way. The day after she made this statement, my friend Eva Galperin at the EFF wrote kind of a write-up basically saying why her statement is completely full of bullshit, and the next day Randy Zuckerberg actually stepped down from that position. So there's some internal shit going on there. Question? Mm-hmm. Right. Right. Just to re-speak this for the microphone, the second part of this does have merit, but they're not necessarily. It's not like association does not play causation. I think it's because you're anonymous. It does not mean I am acting anonymously. I am going to go do horrible things. Some people do, and that's bad. But not everyone does. And also, she's referring to anonymity. I don't think she actually knows the difference between a pseudonym and an anonym. Yes. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yep. Right, and this is why context is so important. So let me move on to the next one, which I'm sure you'll all appreciate. If anybody here is a fan of 4chan, one of the... Yeah, 4chan, okay. So Moot, Christopher Poole, he's actually given a couple of amazing talks. One of them was at TED earlier this year, South by Southwest, and most recently at Web 2.0, where I think this one is from. The portrait of identity online is often painted in black and white. Who you are online is who you are offline. Human identity doesn't work like that online or offline. It's not who you share with, it's who you share as. I love this statement here. Identity is prismatic. It's like if you take white light and shine it through a prism, you get all the different colors. And I think identity works a lot like that. I think that he's really kind of spot on. I recommend people going and checking out his Web 2.0 talk that he gave. I think it was last week or 2 weeks ago. It was fairly recent. But I'm starting to really like this guy. He's, for somebody who created 4chan, which is famous for /B and all these trolls and sock puppets and things, he's actually turned into a guy with a lot of really good things to say. So 4chan is perfect anarchy. So here's the real question that I'm trying to get at. Do we fear identity? What is there to be afraid of? And so there's actually two underlying concepts here. First is, what is there to fear? It's like, the only thing to fear is the unknown, or the only thing to fear is fear itself. I think everyone is afraid of the unknown. Who here gets really nervous when they're about to do something they've never done before? Has some people there? Has anybody here ever given, what's that? Yeah, jumping off, okay, jumping off a cliff. Going to a website you've never been before. It's not goatsy, I promise. Yeah, just trust me, okay? That's exactly what Zuckerberg and Eric Schmidt are saying, by the way. Just trust me. Because the question is, hear what they're saying. They're saying you need one online identity. You need to have something that's unified. Who actually wins if you do that? So if you take everything that you know and every way that you operate and kind of compartmentalize yourself into a frame that they have set, who's winning? What do you have to benefit from that, and what do they have to benefit from that? Somehow I think they kind of win that one. So I want to take a deeper look at some of these social networks. By the way, how am I doing on time? Fuck. Okay. Okay. And, what's that? Crash course. Okay. So important things I want to cover very quickly here. So Facebook, Twitter, blog platforms, Google+. So what I mean by synchronous here with friend requests, with Facebook, you friend somebody by sending them a friend request and they have to accept it. That creates a synchronicity because there's a mutual exchange. If they don't accept it, it just sits idly. In somebody's inboxes, you kind of wait. Twitter, you can just follow somebody unless they have a protected account. Twitter does give that option. Twitter also has the verified identity option. Although I've been trying to figure out exactly how that works. I think it's very much you go to Twitter's office and give them some money and they do it. No, seriously, if you look on, they don't actually have a set policy on their website for this. It's kind of broken and they're not really saying a whole lot about it right now. However, asynchronous following is really useful. You can click on somebody's name and follow them. And somebody can follow you. And it doesn't have the same mutuality as Facebook, but it's much easier and people use it for different reasons. Different things. So blog platforms, like say if you operate a WordPress blog or a Blogger or Blogspot or anything like that, this is kind of a stretch technically, but I would call it asynchronous because people can like take a list of blogs and they can tune into it with an RSS feed. And when you're using blogs, it's the closest thing to following. I mean, I realize that you can have like is it a Blogger account where you can log in and have different blogs that you're sharing and things like that. It's a little web-ringy though. It's a little 1998. So another thing that I think Google really got it right, I'm about to badmouth Google pretty hard, but I want to say I really like Google. Google Plus, they're asynchronous circles, and they just introduced a new feature where you can share circles. What the circles are for people who have not gotten onto Google Plus yet, you can create a circle, which is a list of all the people who you want to follow within a particular group. Which, let's say, here's a list of all the people on Google Plus that I found that were at PhreakNIC that I'm interested in. And you can then interact with them as a circle. And circle is kind of descriptive of the notion of Venn diagram, where you can take two things and merge them together. And you can have that tiny little sliver in the middle of the overlap. So you can have people that are in two different circles at the same time. And the concept of using the word circle to describe it, I think, is really beautiful. Has anybody here used Diaspora? Wow, okay, they really suck at PR. So I'm a little biased here because one of my friends is Ilya, one of the founders of it. He's a really, really good guy. So Diaspora is a social network comparable to Facebook or Google+, but Diaspora is open source. And you can get it all on GitHub and whatnot. It's decentralized. And that's going to get into some important stuff because if it's decentralized, one of the big worries about Google Plus and Facebook are data privacy and what happens when the feds come knocking. Do they even have to tell you about it? Diaspora, all those worries go away if you set up your own node. And the thing is, if you set up your own instance of Diaspora and there's another instance going on somewhere else, you can actually link the two together. And whereas at Facebook, you're like, you say aesthetics at facebook.com or whatever the way they recognize it is. With Diaspora, you set up your own node. So let's say it's phreaknicnode.diaspora.com. Well, I'm aesthetics at the PhreakNIC node, and I can then search for, say, Billy at the Atlanta node. And we can talk to each other even though we're operating totally independent nodes. So I need to plug Diaspora because it's a really good project, and it's open source, and if you want to work on this stuff, you should check that out, because the other things are all closed source and kind of clicky. Is the next slide the thing? Let me see here. OK. This is before I get into really, really bad-mouthing Google. Check this out. The EFF ran this campaign called Who Has Your Back? And they basically created this grid. They went through a number of court cases involving all these different companies. And they had a gold star system of which company fights for you in court. A lot of companies just don't do shit, and they don't even tell you if they've sent the government any of your information. This has been really, really interesting as we've been watching the WikiLeaks thing unfold, as a number of my friends have gotten subpoenas. And people may have seen the Twitter request that they got unsealed by the courts and released that. But Twitter did that. Like, kudos to Twitter for making this more public. Google is actually really, really good about this too. Other ones, MySpace sucks at it, Comcast sucks at it. But I commend EFF for doing this. If you check out whohasyourback.eff.org, you can see more information about it. But it's kind of an interesting experiment in seeing what companies are transparent and in what different ways and why. So I want to go back to policies for a second here. So Facebook also has a real names policy. Most people don't know about it because they just don't really enforce it on the wide scale that Google was. But it's, Facebook users provide their real names and information, and we need your help to keep it that way. They don't actually define what real names are. It's kind of a case-by-case thing. I have not been impacted by it, which is pretty good, because otherwise I would lose out on all the event invites my friends send me. But I just want to keep in mind that Facebook does have one of these. People just don't talk about it. So Google Community Standards, as we went back to the original slide where I got the suspension notice and it gave me the 404 link and whatnot to Community Standards, well, when I actually did get around to finding the Community Standards, they had some good stuff on here. So nudity and sexually explicit material. I agree and disagree. I mean, it depends on privacy settings and who has access to that, I think. Hate speech is probably a big one. Like, for example, calling somebody in Berlin a Nazi is probably a bad thing. Impersonation, these are all really good things, and you can tell that Google is trying to be benevolent, and they're trying to really do what you could best describe as the right thing without really knowing what right is. Unfortunately, they also have this policy called the real names thing, and this was the original policy from the standards to help fight spam and all this other stuff. Use the name your friends, family, or coworkers usually call you. Okay, I can do that. Yeah, sure, great, okay. This is the origination of the real names policy. It actually, after they got a lot of heat, they enumerated it out more. And now, this is where we get interesting, because Andrew Jackson is very famous for this quote. John Marshall has made his decision, now let him enforce it. We got a Supreme Court decision about Cherokee Indians and trying to push them out of Georgia, I think. But the question is, anybody can make a law, anybody can issue a mandate, but the question is, who's actually enforcing it? So we've seen that both Facebook and Google Plus have a real names policy, so let's see how Google enforces it. So just for some context here, I got suspended. I filled out an appeal. I put websites of stuff that I've done, my Twitter ID, links to talks that I've given, things like that. So that was July 23rd of this year. July 25th, I get an email from Neil, Google Plus support team, just contacting me to initiate it. So July 26th, I get an email from him saying, Aestetix is not a common name. Asked me to confirm it's my common name. I'm like, oh, okay, I can do that. So I send him an email confirming it is. July 27th, I get an email saying that they need a government-issued ID to confirm that my name is Aestetix. Now, I'm not sure what kind of a planet he lives on. Yeah. So the other interesting thing about this is that this may be the first documented instance where a social network has asked somebody for ID. Right. So that's really interesting, though, because I responded to this because this kind of caught me off guard. I consider a government-issued ID sensitive information. I will give it to places that have a process for it. So I reply to this to confirm that they have that they define a common name exclusively as the name on a government ID, and then I also ask for what their policy is for handling stuff. Because if they actually have a policy and I can send it over a secure connection, and they're working with a government agency that is trusted and whatnot, it makes sense. So it didn't exactly happen. July 28th, I get an email back. Your common name does not have to be the ID or the name on your ID. I need to get the name off your ID to confirm that your name is Aestetix. I'm like, what? What the fuck? So here's my reply. If the name is the only thing you need, can you use the information I provided in my appeal to make the same judgment? I'm confused as to why it must be a government-issued ID. And I must make a subnote here that in the appeals form, when I filled out all that information, it said sending them an ID was optional. And then I got the email saying that I needed to send them one. So there's a little bit more contradictory there. So then I get this email, and I'm like, what the fuck? It says, thank you for contacting us with regard to the name you want to use with your Google profile. After further review, we have determined that your name is within our community standards policy. Thank you for your patience while we reviewed your profile name. I will trust it as your real name. Most users just try to explain that it is the pseudonym that they have always used. I posted all these emails online, and it makes no sense to me. So then, a couple weeks later, I got suspended again. And this is the point where I said, fuck it, and I left. Because I can either play this game back and forth nonstop all day long, or, I can go to my job and, live like a normal person and tell them to fuck off and express myself in other ways. So, now, one interesting thing I want to point out here, if you recall the first photo of the suspended account, there were 2 lines and one of them was a broken link. This one, it actually kind of clearly delineates names policy, what the names policy is what they're trying to do. And also, they made a change between the 2 times I got suspended. When I was suspended before, it was just set suspended. I couldn't make posts. It was interesting. I could actually upload photos. All these photos are screenshots that I took and then uploaded to my Google Plus account. Which is why they're all dated. I was actually using Twitter, and I was uploading these screenshots and then linking to it on Twitter and on Facebook, and forcing people to look at my Google Plus account to see all of my complaints about being suspended. The best part was I actually had a period where, because they wouldn't allow me to, I just couldn't make text entries. I couldn't make blog posts. I couldn't comment. I couldn't make +1s, things like that. So it's well, there are a couple ways to get text out there. So in Notepad or something, I wrote up a blog entry, took a screenshot of it, and uploaded that blog post in as an image. And then linked to it on Facebook. Oh, we'll get to that. Oh, they claim that they have backpedaled. Fuck, what time is it? What? What? Okay. 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 Lightning talk. Okay, shit, I had no idea. I'm near the end of it. Can I use another 5 minutes maybe? Okay, cool. I just want to point out a couple of other friends of mine, including my friend Sai. Remember I said mononyms earlier? This is his driver's license. His passport also says this. SAI, that is his entire name. My friend Doc Popular, he's known as Doc Pop. That's his Twitter account. That's his website. He's a really great guy. He does yo-yos. He makes music. He's a really good friend. Doc, both of them got suspended. Although I just have a screenshot of something that Doc did to his Twitter account after, he did to his Google Plus account after they suspended. He's like, oh, okay, I need to edit to make it look like a real name, so he did this. Yeah, and the subtext here, made up a fake name because Google wouldn't let me use my real one. And his account got suspended. The other thing with him, apparently they don't have it disconnected very well, which meant that he was an avid user of Google Reader. In his post, he couldn't share documents with Google Reader or something like that. But yes, his Google Reader also got suspended by this stuff. Right. Right. Well, that's a good question. And the other question is, if I scan in my ID and send it to them, what do they do with it? Is it just sitting around on a hard drive somewhere? There's actually been a comparable issue going on in San Francisco right now. where they're trying to push through a new clause in the entertainment permit, the permit you have to get to run any kind of event, that demands that venues that get the entertainment permit have an ID scanner, and they scan IDs of everyone before they enter. Now, keep in mind, they don't have any kind of data retention policy on there. They don't have any kind of safeguard, any technical guidance, which means if you're a bouncer and you're pissed off at the nightclub, you can take the fucking hard drive and go sell it on eBay or something. It's exactly the same. Actually, there's a number of elementary schools that have started experimenting with putting fingerprint scanners on school buses. Yeah, so, let's see, is this the, okay. So I'm near the end here. I promise. So lessons learned. Google doesn't know what a common name is. Google is demanding sensitive information without any security procedures or policies in place. If you know someone at Google, you'll be fine because you can just escalate it internally up the chain. I'm pretty sure that when I was bitching about this on Twitter, friends of mine following me who saw me and worked at Google discussed this internally and reinstated my account without telling me. Number 4, Google doesn't have a fucking clue what identity means. So I have the video now. Can I try to play this? Let's see. Can people hear this? Can you hear that? Okay. Can I just hold the mic up to my computer then? Sorry. Let me see. Can I grab that mic maybe? This is like the second to last slide, I swear. Oh, I can grab that mic? Okay, cool. Whatever.
Testing.
Okay, cool. I hope this works. If it doesn't, I will blame Google.
I want to ask you.
Can you hear that?
Related to that last comment about privacy, about what's been called.
You can't hear that at all? I'm trying to. Oh, that's the.
I want to ask you, related to that last comment about privacy, about what's been called the real.
Can you hear that at all?
Pseudonyms are extremely important to people, as some speakers earlier in the conference mentioned. Many hackers like to call themselves by their handles and not by their real name. And there's any number of very good reasons to not use your real name. There's any number of bad reasons to not use your real name, but you currently have a policy which is you must use your real name. Yeah. Eric in the press defended that as we are an identity company and therefore we want to have the right identity. Will you reconsider that?
So the answer is a bit more complicated. Let me give you the short version. The short version is we plan to support pseudonyms in the future. We're working on it. So it's coming.
Oh, I hadn't heard that.
Yeah, it's coming. We're working on it. It was largely an issue of development priorities. It's complicated to get this right. It's complicated on multiple dimensions. One of the dimensions it's complicated on is atmosphere. You know, if you're a woman and you post a photo and Captain Crunch or Dog Fart comments on it, it changes the atmosphere of the product. And so we wanted the product to have to be a product that where you could discover people you know. And they're not called Captain Crunch. They're called Lisa Adams, and that's how you discover the people that you know. That doesn't mean that we're not going to support other forms of identity. It's coming. It's just that this is the way we wanted to roll out the service. This is the atmosphere we wanted to set. And as we are out more than a month, we've been out in beta, open for about a month, we'll add these features.
That was Vik Kandutra, the guy who is in charge of Google+. And in fact, the real names policy that we've been bitching about, he is the sole person keeping it in place. I want to quickly close here with a little role playing. Can I get a volunteer to come up really fast? This is going to be fun, trust me.
Testing. Does this work?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, so go ahead and for each skit, read what's for guest.
Okay.
Oh, yeah? And eat the mic, so.
Hi, I'm Mark Zuckerberg, the CEO of Facebook.
Can you guys hear that? Try it again a little bit louder.
Hi. All right. I'm Mike Zuckerberg, the CEO at Facebook.
Hi, Mark. How's it going?
Fine. I just wanted to let you know we overhauled the entire profile and privacy settings of the changed all our defaults. Oh, by the way, gave you chat logs to the Secret Service, and an officer will be showing you up at your house soon.
All right. Skit number 2.
Hi, I'm Vik something or other.
Kandutra.
Kandutra, the Google executive in charge of Google+.
Hi, Vic. How's it going?
Just dandy. I hope you like our free service. It's so great you're using it, even though you could just use another service. By the way, we just decided to be stupid, fascist pigfuckles, and we are going to be arbitrarily enforce a policy that doesn't work. despite a large majority of opposition within our company. And in the meantime, we're going to break other parts of the service you use. Oh, did I mention it's a free service?
Oh, okay. Last skit.
Hi, I'm MySpace.
Who?
We were cool back in 2006, and by the way, you can log into our service using Facebook now.
Thank you for that. So I think I'm basically out of time. I don't have time to get into the Occupy Wall Street stuff, but I think that this is going to start defining a lot of what's going on within social networking in the future. And in terms of what you can do to help, I think looking into yourself and figuring out what identity means to you, seeing how it works within social networking systems if you're interested. Check out Diaspora. If you're interested in working on a project that can actually possibly change the game, contribute to them, contribute source code, things like that. Is that the last slide? And just any questions? Or am I out of time? Oh, question. Up to the mic. Mic. Here we go.
So I saw your comment on JWZ's blog a few days ago.
Yeah.
What do you think of his two-point plan and about that internal issue getting voted up at Google?
Yeah, so that gets complicated. I have to think about what I should say publicly about that one. So for people who don't know, JWZ is Jamie Zawinski, who was one of the original writers of Netscape. He, in San Francisco, he owns and operates the DNA Lounge, which is a great nightclub that I've been to many, many times. So Vic made that statement that you all just saw. And he says, we plan to support pseudonyms in the future. And a lot of people just kind of cut off. Like, oh boy, they're supporting pseudonyms. And Jamie then posted a blog entry, basically, he was effectively saying, there are two ways to handle this. Or there's a two-step program. Number one, stop suspending and deleting accounts of people using pseudonyms. Number two, there is no step two. So there was a lot of back and forth going on about this. And I mean, as you saw, you check out jwz.org/blog, I think. But I tend to agree with what he's saying. I'm not sure exactly what Google is doing. I have my suspicions, some of which I'll say publicly and some I won't. But I'm scared. I think that perhaps more people should be looking at what's going on right now. I don't know, what was the, actually, let me throw this back at you for a moment. What was your impression based on what you saw there? Because there's like 8 things that I could say in response. I want to make sure I say the right response. Yeah, what was your impression of that blog entry?
I got the impression that it's really not said and done, and Vic's really not being forthright. And what I understand is internally, techs get to vote up, or maybe not techs, but employees get to vote up issues that are spoken to at the board level, and it was non-answered.
Right.
Issue.
So among other things, just to answer that a bit more, Google also, I don't work at Google. I have a number of friends that do. I've been to the Googleplex once for lunch with somebody. It was a great time. And overall, I don't want to seem like I'm bad-mouthing Google. I use Google. I would be using, the only problem with Google Plus besides the real names thing is that it's on a centralized system that I don't have full control over, and that's just me being a paranoid cypherpunk. Now, on the other hand, I think that their services are great. I use it all the time. So it's tricky to be able to say this, but I think a lot of this is not with Google itself, but specifically with Vic. By the way, Vic is a pseudonym, if you guys didn't know. If you actually look up, it's like a shortened version of his real name. When that came out, that was really funny. But yeah, no, what you're getting at is that normally decisions are made within a lot of companies, Google in particular, where people just do things. Like, for example, Gmail. And I think Google Docs maybe too came out of the 20% rule they have, where somebody was just working on something on the side, turning out, hey, this is really cool, everyone seems to like it, let's do it. Google Plus, for a large extent, was that. I can't remember his name, but the primary engineer behind Google Plus, really great guy, really brilliant project, and it's been destroyed now. When Google first launched Google Plus, almost immediately they had 20 million members, which is unheard of growth rate. And last I checked, it was up to about 50, but the curve was trailing a little bit. And then it gets into the difference between how many members that you have and how many active users you have. The reason that I left, besides the fact that I was getting pissed off at this, is because everyone I knew on there who was actually using it at all was discussing this real name stuff. And I'm like, okay, well, can we move on to something else? And anybody else had basically left. So anybody who I cared about within my own social network that I cared to associate with whom I cared to discuss things. So it sucks because it's such an awesome platform, and I just feel that they're mishandling a lot of things. And by they, I mean Vit Gendotra. I don't know what his reasoning is for everything. I've heard a lot of different arguments. I've heard the market and data argument, and I'm like, maybe that's it. I don't know what goes on inside of his mind, but I don't like it. I mean, if I could have like a one-on-one discussion with him, which would probably result in blood all over my fist and his nose broken, it would be interesting to see. What's that?
How about lightning tomorrow?
Okay, lightning. Okay, is this my cue to get off?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, thank you all.
Give him a round of applause. You did great.